Hey guys, what's up? Merry Christmas! My name is Sky Webb and I'm here to talk about a true crime story that I cannot get off my mind. But before I get started, I just want to put out a little disclaimer that I mean no harm to any of the victims or the victims' families, and I wish everybody who was hurt within this story the utmost peace and solace, either in rest or in recovery. With that out of the way, this Thursday's true crime video is about the absolutely bizarre case of the Christmas witchcraft murder. Every single Thursday of December, I'll be posting a Christmas-themed video to help us get into the Christmas spirit. This Thursday, I'm wearing this as like Christmas lights as a necklace, but is broken and doesn't light up because everything I own is broken, basically. So, but yeah, Merry Christmas! This video will probably feel a little bit Halloween-y for the fact that it is about witchcraft, but the crime did occur on Christmas Day, and so that's Christmas enough for me. It kind of fits our MO. Quick disclaimer though that this video does involve torture as well as just looking at some kind of mentally deranged people. Just keep that in mind, but if that doesn't bother you, then welcome aboard and let's jump into it. On Christmas Day 2010, Kristy Bamu was found dead after drowning in a bathtub in a small flat in East London. Kristy was only 15 years old at the time, and he'd actually travelled all the way from Paris with his two brothers and two sisters in order to visit older sister Magli for the Christmas holidays, and that's whose flat that they were staying at. Along with the 5 kids now staying in the flat, Magli also had her boyfriend Eric Bakumi staying with her as well. And despite being the kids' older sister and somebody who was supposed to protect and love them, Magli sort of turned on the kids and she became a really dangerous threat to them. So Magli and Eric were said to have been obsessed with kendoku, which is a word used to mean witchcraft or possession, things along those lines. Kendoku comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and a lot of people refer to it as African voodoo, which sort of goes to show that it's witchcrafty, voodoo-y, possession, supernatural stuff. Kendoku is actually widely believed in throughout the UK, and there is a high percentage of child abandonment cases that revolve around some sort of misguided belief in kendoku, which is crazy to me. So it's actually really well known and widespread throughout the UK, which is where this crime took place. So both Magli and Eric started to suspect that the kids may have been dabbling in witchcraft and that they were witches. And so this tiny little suspicion quickly grew into paranoia, where they become afraid of the children, and so they started to accuse the children of being witches. They accused all of the children and then accused Kristy of actually performing witchcraft and performing spells on other kids. So at this point, things started to turn really sinister, and the couple would torture the kids with household objects, sort of using whatever they could to hit, poke, prod, whip, belt these children into confessing that they were witches. What they wanted from them was a confession, an undeniable admission that yes, they were witches, and then they sort of wanted them to repent and pray and whatever else. And so they would torture these kids sort of non-stop for 4 days in order to get this confession out of them, and they would also deprive them of food and sleep. They weren't allowed to eat anything, and they were kept up all night for those 3 to 4 days so that they wouldn't get any rest. During that time, they were also forced to pray for deliverance multiple times per day. So while the kids were visiting, their parents did try to get into contact with them, and they did call. At one point they were successful at getting into contact, but Kelly, which is one of the sisters, answered the phone. She was 20 years old at the time, but what the parents didn't realize on the other end is that Eric was actually holding a knife to Kelly's throat, and so Kelly couldn't say anything. She couldn't ask for help, she couldn't ask to come home. There was really nothing she could do, and that's why he had the knife to her throat. And so nothing came of it, and the parents went about their day thinking that the kids were all happy spending Christmas together. So Kelly and the other sister did sort of cop more abuse than the other two brothers did. Kristy got the most abuse out of everybody. He was the one who was really heavily abused, but the two sisters did get more than the other two brothers for the fact that they were female, and it was believed that they would be more likely to hone in on their witchcraft and be more likely to actually abuse it, I suppose, rather than the two brothers. And so they did get beaten quite badly. Kristy, however, earlier on in the first couple of days, he peed his pants, and his abusers almost sort of like picked on him for that. That was another reason that they hated him and lashed into him more than the others. And then on top of that, there was sort of an element of fear because they thought that he had already been using witchcraft and casting spells, and so there was like an intimidation aspect where they thought that maybe he was a threat to them, and so they would go a lot harder on him than the others. They would use broken floor tiles to stab him or scratch him. They'd use pliers to take his ears and twist them and pull them and rip them. And they'd also break bottles over his head and try and break his teeth and knock his teeth out. He was definitely far worse off than the rest of his siblings, which is really horrible. I'm glad it didn't happen to all of them, but it must have been a very horrible feeling to be the one that was targeted. So at this point, Eric and Magley had actually started to force the other children to join in on the torture and the abuse. And so it sort of became it's either him or you type situation where the kids would have to join in on the abuse, otherwise the abuse would be turned onto them. And so they'd be threatened with violence and they would be filled with fear, and they were given instruments in order to hurt Kristy, and if they didn't do it, they would have that instrument then used and turned on them. I'm not going to say much of an opinion on that just because I can't imagine being in that situation, and I don't think anyone would know what they would do in that situation unless they're put in it. But the kids did use those instruments, and so they did torture their 15-year-old brother. Kelly, who was 20 at the time, was given a big long metal rod and instructed to belt him with it, and so she did. She caned him across the mouth and actually knocked his tooth out, broke his tooth. And the kids were also given a chisel, a knife and a hammer, and they used those on him as well. As I said, I don't want to really speculate on that just because I can't imagine what I would do, and I don't want to pass any judgment, even though I kind of want to pass judgment because I'm just like, how could you do that to your brother? It must have been really psychologically damaging for all of them, to be perfectly honest. But that being said, at this point, Kristy was in so much pain that he began to beg for death. He wanted to die. He couldn't stand it anymore. He was in unbearable amounts of pain and he just wanted it to end. He just wanted to die, and so he would beg Magley, he would beg Eric to kill him. He would then beg his sister Kelly and his other sister to kill him, and then he even begged his 22-year-old autistic brother, who was also there and also being tortured, begged him to kill him too, and it was just this horrible, horrible, psychologically damaging thing that happened, and I'm just like, oh. So as I said, the torture lasted about 3 or 4 days, and then on the last day, which was Christmas Day, Kristy was placed into the bathtub for a ritual cleansing. I don't know what goes into a ritual cleansing, but that was done by Eric. And at this point, Kristy was in so much pain. He was so drained. He was so exhausted. He hadn't eaten, he hadn't slept, and he was just in excruciating pain that just wouldn't end. And so he couldn't hold his head above the water, nor do I think he wanted to anymore. At this point, he was still begging for death. And so he allowed himself to slip underneath the water, and Kristy drowned in the bathtub in Magley's flat in East London. So Eric claims that at that point he didn't realise that he was dead. We don't know how true or accurate that necessarily is, but eventually the police were called, and so the police showed up on scene to find all the children in the living room huddled together. They were all drenched in water and blood, and there was also blood seen throughout the living room and the apartment. As well as noticing sort of the blood and the water and everything else, the police also noticed that the 2 girls did appear to be injured, and so they knew something was wrong. None of the children spoke English, and as I said, they were all very panicked. So when the police did arrive, it was kind of hard for them to piece together what was really going on. Everything just seemed really chaotic, but because the girls did seem to be injured and everyone seemed to be very scared, and obviously a boy had died. They knew something was very, very wrong with this situation, and so Magley and Eric were taken into custody. Now, once in custody, Eric was fairly forthcoming, but when he went to trial, he claimed that he had a brain injury, and that this brain injury made him more inclined to believe in witchcraft. And so he said that had it not been for this brain injury, he wouldn't have been inclined to believe in witchcraft. He wouldn't have been inclined to believe that these children had been witches and trying to hurt him, because that's the story that they gave, was that they thought these kids were trying to murder them, and that's why they tortured them. The judge actually did agree with this, not the murder witchcraft part, but he did agree with the brain injury story, and he said of course that would make you more inclined to believe in such things, but that being said, what you did is inexcusable despite any brain injury that you may or may not have. And he said that what occurred was a prolonged psychological and physical torture, and it just wasn't excusable whatsoever. It wasn't acceptable. Magley then tried to claim she wasn't responsible for what had happened. She said that she doesn't believe in witchcraft. She knows that her siblings aren't witches by any means, and that it was actually Eric who believed in witches and who had convinced her that this needed to happen. And she said in the same way that both of them actually had forced the children to torture and abuse Kristy against their will, she claimed that Eric had forced her to abuse the children against her will, which was bullshit, obviously, and the judge basically said as much. He said that your denial just isn't believable and we're not having it, and that was that on that. That was that on that, sis. So Eric pleaded guilty to performing grievously bodily harm, as well as pleading guilty to murder, whereas Magley pleaded non-guilty to all of the charges. However, both of them were found guilty and they were both sentenced to life in prison, which I think is a great result. So the 4 surviving kids did actually make statements during the trial, and they were all very visibly affected by what had happened psychologically. Kelly and the 22-year-old autistic brother seemed to be the most psychologically impacted by these events, but all of the kids actually did need psychological help afterwards. Also, the reason that there's not a lot of information about the other children was for the fact that they didn't speak English, and so a lot of things were sort of lost in translation and it got really complicated. The Bamu parents also made a statement and they were absolutely devastated. They said that they felt really betrayed. They also said that they felt empty, knowing that their son had been tortured by someone who was supposed to love and protect him. They felt really empty that it was her who had done this, and that that was their child and that was his sister, and that he would have had this going through his mind. They felt really devastated by this. And they also said they would do anything to be able to change the way he spent the last 3 days of his life, which I think is really a heartbreaking thing to say and a heartbreaking way to feel, because at the end of the day, it wasn't their fault. You should be able to trust your own daughter and his sister to take care of him. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the devastating story of the Christmas witchcraft murder. This one definitely hits a little harder than I think most cases do, for the fact that it was a family, man. Like, they were family. You're meant to look after each other. And then on top of that, there was a 12-year-old kid, a 15-year-old kid that died, and the fact that they had to turn on each other. It's just, this one hits hard for me personally, and it's killing me. So let me know what you think about this story in the comments down below, or you can head over to my Facebook, which is skyweb with 3 Bs, and let me know there. I'd love to know what you think about the kids having to torture each other. I'd really like to know your perspective on that and what you think might have been able to have been done. I'd also love to know what you think about the whole Kinjuku witchcraft voodoo type thing, especially for the fact that it's so widely believed throughout the UK, and it has such a high percentage of child abandonment and child protection cases involved with it. I think that's nuts. So I'd really love to know what you guys think and have to say about that. So make sure you give this video a big thumbs up if you feel like it. I would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so that you can see all the new videos that I post. I post every single Thursday all about true crime, and I'm hoping to post some new content in the new year, 2020. This is our year. So make sure you guys are being safe out there. Don't practice witchcraft. Don't date people who take ritual cleansing baths, whatever that means. And whatever you do, don't visit family over Christmas because they'll torture you and you'll die. So make sure you guys are staying safe out there, be careful, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!